What's up guys, welcome to another range day. Today we're going to be shooting the brand new and highly divisive Daniel Defense H9. Guys, if you enjoy the content that I'm making, then please make sure to like and subscribe and leave me a message down in the comments section. I hate asking, but it really does help with the algorithm a lot, so I would really appreciate it. And if you ring the bell icon, you should get notifications when new videos are released as well. Additionally, if you want to get more Chester's Hobbies content, you can follow me on Instagram where you can see what I'm working on and get previews of upcoming videos. And I'm also pretty active on Reddit if you'd like to follow along with the conversations there. Alright, well that's enough of that, so back to the gun of the day, my Daniel Defense H9. Now if you saw my first impressions video, you'll know that I did have some issues with my H9 when I first got it, and I actually ended up having to send it in for warranty repair. Now I've since gotten it back, and so far things are looking a little bit better, but not exactly perfect. Now I'm going to be digging into the details on that in a bit, but for now let's talk a little bit about the Daniel Defense H9 itself and what makes it unique in the crowded 9mm pistol market of 2024. Now the H9 actually represents one of the more interesting handgun stories of the last decade in my opinion. It was originally designed and released by a company called Hudson as the Hudson H9 in 2017. Now I actually bought the Hudson H9 myself back in 2018 and I really enjoyed the concept, but there were some issues with the original execution that led to a lot of reliability issues that they really weren't prepared to address. As a result, Hudson actually ended up going out of business in 2020, which is right around the time that I decided to sell my H9 because I like to shoot my guns and I was concerned that at some point down the road it would maybe fall apart on me and parts might not be available for such a unique design. Now in the background of all this, Daniel Defense, who has a stellar reputation in the AR world and with various military and police contracts, swooped in and bought the H9 design in 2020 and began quietly working on their very first handgun. So now 4 years and reportedly a million rounds of testing later, we now have the Daniel Defense H9. While it does maintain the spirit of the original, there are a lot of changes. In fact, out of all of the parts in the handgun, there's only one tiny part that it shares with the original Hudson H9. Everything else has been completely redesigned from the ground up. Now, the original concept of the H9 is very sound and interesting in my opinion. Basically, you could look at it like marrying a striker-fired gun like, say, a Glock with a 1911 grip frame and trigger style, but there is more to it than that. The H9 aims to bring the bore axis as low as possible to help give you a mechanical advantage over the firearm when controlling recoil. Now, to help get the barrel lower than most other handguns, the recoil spring assembly is placed in line with the trigger guard and ultimately the palm of your hand instead of being above the trigger guard like most other pistol designs. The result of this design is a recoil impulse that has felt more straight back into your hand than most 9mm pistols, and the design itself is intended to greatly reduce muzzle flip. Now the original H9 was a full-size pistol with a full-size steel frame, which I personally really liked. Heavier guns soak up recoil and make for very pleasant shooters on the range. But Daniel Defense decided to take a different approach with their H9, which ultimately seems to center around building it out more as a slim, concealed carry option instead of a full-size duty gun. So instead of a full-size steel frame, they went with an aluminum compact frame while keeping the full-size slide. And normally I'm not personally a fan of this style of design with a short grip and the long barrel, but in the case of the Daniel H9, it honestly seems to work pretty well. The gun is surprisingly well balanced and very comfortable in the hand to me. It feels like a very ergonomic, compact gun in the hand until you shoot it and realize that it actually shoots as well or better than many full-size handguns on the market. It really is quite impressive, especially considering the lighter weight over the original design. The gun is also extremely thin, coming in at only 1-inch thick at the slide and 1.2 inches thick at the ambidextrous slide stop and release levers, which puts it in the same realm as something like the popular SIG P365 in terms of thickness, which would help with concealability for those interested in doing so. Now, one common comment that I hear people say about the Daniel Defense H9 that I really want to dispel right away is that this design eliminates recoil. It absolutely does not do that. You can't defeat physics, unfortunately. In fact, I would actually argue that in some ways there's maybe even a little bit more felt recoil in the H9 than in similar platforms. Now, don't get me wrong, it's certainly not unpleasant. It's actually a pretty warm and round feeling recoil impulse. It's not overly sharp or snappy by any stretch, but you definitely do feel it. There is, however, noticeably less muzzle flip for me personally, and the sights are back on target pretty quickly, making quick follow-up shots easy and fun to pull off. Now, aside from the switch to a compact aluminum frame, there are a few other changes to the general design that are worth mentioning as well. They raised the dust cover and recoil spring assembly a little bit higher than the original design, which makes mounting lights slightly less awkward here than it was before because it would hang so low. It's still lower and less ergonomic for general light operation than most pistols, but it does work a lot better now than it did before. They added a deeper undercut to the trigger guard to help get your hand up higher on the grip frame, which was a great decision in my opinion. And then when you look at the front and rear straps of the pistol grip, you notice some pretty interesting looking deep and blunt serrations. This is a pretty big contrast to the original H9, which used a more traditional 25 lines per inch checkering design that most people are probably familiar with. When I initially saw the design of these, I was a little bit concerned that they would be uncomfortable or ineffective. But honestly, much to my surprise, I was completely wrong. I actually actually find them to be very comfortable, and under live fire, they really lock my gun into the hand, which is great. The grip panels themselves are fairly standard looking G10 style grip panels. I'm really hoping that someone like Lock or VZ Grips will make some aftermarket panels for it at some point, because the G10 grips are fine, but they're really not great. I think they're appropriate for concealed carry because they're not so aggressive that they're going to chew you up while you're carrying, but at the range, I would personally like a little bit more traction and maybe even some palm swells. The ergonomics of the grip and the beaver tail feel excellent to me, and the gun points very naturally for me. Now, the ergonomics of the pistol do seem to be one of the more divisive elements with the Daniel Defense H9. I'd say it feels very similar in hand to a compact 1911 because it has the same grip angle and roughly the same grip thickness, but it is maybe a little bit thinner, and some people do have issues with an edge on the beaver tail that you can see right here. It's a little bit hard to see, but there is kind of a sharpish edge right here, especially where the beaver tail meets with the frame. And depending on how you grip the pistol, that can kind of bite you a bit while you're shooting. When I first got the H9 out and started shooting with it, I admit I did have some issues with that. You can see maybe right here-ish is where it was grabbing my hand. To counteract that and make it a non-issue for me, instead of having my thumb right up against the slide, I basically rest my thumb on my support hand, and then I don't have any more issues with it. Now, I know a lot of people might take issues with that. They don't want to have to adjust their grip to the gun, and I totally understand that. And for that reason, I do think that Daniel Defense will want to take a look at this for future iterations of the pistol and try to make it something that can work for everybody's grip instead of just some people's grips. The proprietary steel magazines seem great so far, and impressively, they're actually only $25 from Daniel Defense, which is very surprising for a proprietary mag. They appear to be of great quality, similar to something you might see from, say, Mec-Gar, with a bright yellow, high visibility follower. Long-term durability impressions will have to come with time, but so far so good on these. The magazine release feels great. It's very easy to reach and actuate with the relief cut in the grip panel. The slide serrations look good and they're fairly functional, but I do wish that they were a little bit deeper and grippier. That said, they do function fine and they're very usable. The slide stop and release lever works well. Some people have had trouble with the slide not locking back on the last round of a magazine, but I haven't really had that issue yet with my grip personally. Now, the sights themselves are great. They're a Hackathorn style serrated black rear with a bright fiber optic front sight. But with that being said, I do really wish that the sights would co-witness with the optic. I will commend Daniel Defense for making their H9 optic ready as the original wasn't, but I think they really only got about halfway there for me personally. Now, fortunately, they didn't lock the rear sights onto the plate cover like a lot of companies do, but they didn't include co-witness sights, and their optic plate design puts the optic fairly high on the gun as well. Now, it's not the end of the world, and it's something I can pretty easily get over, but I really wish they had created a stronger male-female relationship between the optic plate and the slide like other companies have. That can really help maintain zero under the violent recoil of a 9mm slide, but the mating surface of the optic plate to the slide on the H9 is completely smooth, only held in place by screws. Now, that puts a lot of stress on those screws, and I've already seen some instances of the plate loosening for people after a long range session. So it's definitely something I'm going to keep my eye on, but hopefully red Loctite will prevent it from becoming a major issue for me. Then there's the unfortunate situation that we're running into with a lot of pistol manufacturers these days, which is that the gun comes optics ready from the factory, but no plates are included in the box. Now, much like Walther, Daniel Defense includes a QR code in the box so you can order a plate of your choosing for free. Now, that's not necessarily terrible, and it's certainly better than a company like CZ that makes you buy the plate for yourself after buying the pistol, but it's still not a great experience for the end user either, especially in the case of a brand new pistol like the H9, where at the time of making this video, I ordered my optic plate over 6 weeks ago and I haven't received any updates on it yet. According to the website, it could take up to 90 days to ship, which is just wild to me. So with that in mind, I ended up going to C&H Precision and having a custom plate made for my Holosun EPS. I think they're planning on making this a standard offering pretty soon, but for now I had to do a custom order. It was more expensive than I would have liked, but I could get it a lot quicker than the free plate from Daniel Defense, and Daniel Defense actually doesn't even make a plate for the Holosun EPS or 407K platforms, which is kind of wild considering how popular they've become in recent years. Regardless, I've got the plate from C&H Precision, which is very well machined, super thin with great thread engagement, and now I've got the Holosun EPS 6MOA dot on there. This is actually my first time using an EPS sight, and so far I'm really liking it. Now lastly, we come to one of the most talked about features of the H9, the trigger. So this is not a standard pivot style striker fire trigger like you might be used to seeing. It's a straight pull 1911 style trigger with a nice short reset. However, I do have to say it's definitely not a 1911 trigger in terms of the feel of the break or the overall quality. Don't get me wrong, it's a really nice striker fire trigger. I actually like it quite a bit. I just don't want to give the impression that it's a 1911 quality level. As for the feel of the trigger, the first thing that you're going to feel is the reverse safety dingus, which is going to pivot towards the top of the trigger instead of the bottom of the trigger like most striker fired pistols do. The original H9 had this design as well, and I grew to kind of hate it at the time. It just had kind of a weird feeling during the prep phase to me. The Daniel H9 is a little bit better than my memory of the Hudson, but it still does take some getting used to. Now that said, under live fire, I almost never notice it. It's only something I notice during dry fire practice. So I'll run that trigger here for you so we'll see we're clear. So we've got this weird safety dingus, right? A little bit of prep, not much. Now we're on the wall. And then it's a nice break. Very short reset, fairly tactile. And you're right at the wall again. And then it breaks. Now, when I first got the H9, there was a little bit of creep beyond the wall before the trigger would break, but now that I'm a few hundred rounds in, it's actually really cleaned up a lot and it feels much better now. It's much cleaner with less creep and mush than when I initially got my hands on it, so that's good to see. The trigger breaks right around 5 or 6 pounds, but honestly it feels a bit lighter to me because of the straight pull. The reset is short and it is tactile, but it's not very forceful like some other triggers. I liked the trigger when I first got it, but the more I use it and break it in, I have to say I'm honestly really liking it quite a bit. It's certainly not the best striker fire trigger out there, but it's a far cry from the worst for sure. So that's what we got going on for today here, guys. Now before we hit the range, let's dig in a little bit on my experience with the H9 so far and give you an update on how things went with my warranty repair. Now first off, guys, for anyone wondering, I did pay for this pistol with my own money. It was not given to me by Daniel Defense. I'm going to be very honest with everyone about my experiences with this gun. Now that certainly doesn't mean that I'm going to completely slam this gun and drag it through the mud and talk about how terrible it is, because the truth of the matter is there are a lot of elements of this gun that I do like quite a bit, but unfortunately there are definitely some things that I really don't like about it, so we're going to be talking about all of those as well. Now, as a little bit of a disclaimer here for anyone that's interested in getting a Daniel H9 of their own, when you receive the pistol, it is going to be bone dry. Zero lube on the gun whatsoever. This is the way the Daniel Defense production department decided that they wanted to ship the gun out to people, but they've also confirmed that the gun really likes to be run wet. If you look in the manual, there are some very detailed diagrams outlining where you'll want to lubricate. So when I first got the gun, I lubricated it well according to their instructions and then did quite a bit of testing without actually being able to get out for a full range day. So far, I've fired over 300 rounds at the time of this recording and I've still had 0 malfunctions under live fire. Now, if you saw my first impressions video on the H9, you'll know that I was pretty impressed with how the gun shot, but I was unfortunately having a couple of strange issues with it. Now, the main issue that I was having is that around 80% of the time, the gun wouldn't successfully go into battery when attempting to chamber a round on a fresh magazine when releasing the slide with the slide lock lever. Now, the result was actually the same if I manually racked the slide or slingshot the slide from slide lock. It just wouldn't go fully into battery, being either about a millimeter or even a centimeter out of battery. Now, every time this would happen, all I would have to do is tap the back of the slide and it would go into battery and be ready to go. However, that should not in any way be considered normal operation, and is something that would cause me to consider the gun to be unreliable for serious use. Now, the second issue that I had was manual ejection of chambered rounds was really difficult, far more difficult than any other pistol I've ever used. This made malfunction clearing and unloading the firearm somewhat of an unnerving task. So I contacted Daniel Defense's warranty department to see what their customer service experience would be like. Honestly, I've got to say, I was pretty impressed. They were very friendly and responsive and confirmed over the phone that they believed they had already identified the issue and that most likely the culprit of both issues was a QA error in the polishing of the feed ramp. To that end, they gave me a prepaid next day shipping label with UPS and took good notes on the issues that I was having. They estimated there would be about 2 weeks to turn around the repair for me. So I shipped the pistol out on a Monday, they received it on Tuesday, and on Wednesday I got a confirmation email stating that my H9 had been repaired, tested, and packed up for shipping back to me. So I sent it out on a Monday and got it back that Friday. Now guys, that is a really impressive turnaround, but I honestly can't say that that would be the same experience everyone has, because they did know about the video that I released as I wanted them to see the demonstrations of the issues that I was having. So while I would love to believe that they turned it around quickly because it was a simple fix, I can easily see a situation where they prioritized my repair to try to influence a positive follow-up video. Now from a business perspective, I totally get it, and obviously I was glad to receive it back so quickly, but I do want to make sure that I'm fully upfront with you about this so that expectations are properly managed. Now as for the repair itself, the notes said that they found a strange bevel at the start of the feed ramp, so they replaced the barrel, polished the feed ramp and chamber, and test fired 30 rounds to confirm function. And they also confirmed that they had no issues chambering live rounds from slide lock. And at the end of the notes, they mentioned that the manual ejection seemed to be good to go as well. Now since I've gotten it back, I haven't had a chance to fire a ton of rounds yet, but I have dropped the slide on live rounds over 50 times in testing, and I've still had 3 or 4 instances of the slide not going fully into battery. Now that is a lot better than before I sent it out for warranty repair, but it's still not what I would consider reliable. When I contacted Daniel Defense to inquire about this, they indicated that with a new barrel there would likely be another minor break-in period, and at that point I had only put like 30 rounds or so into the gun, so I kept running it, and honestly, so far so good I think, but I'll definitely be keeping a close eye on it today on the range. Now when it comes to the manual ejection of live chambered rounds, we're not completely out of the woods unfortunately. I will say that I've found that if I rack the gun aggressively, I can eject a live round on the first try 10 out of 10 times as long as I'm being very aggressive with it. A lot more so than I have to be with any of my other firearms. If I rack the slide with light or medium pressure as demonstrated in my first impressions video, it's going to take multiple tries just like before. Now looking at this closer, I've noticed that with live rounds, when I manually eject the round, there will be a slight dent in the bullet where it was actually hitting the barrel hood while trying to eject the round. Between that and a potentially overly tight extractor or a sharp piece of the slide opposite the extractor, I think there's still a bit of an issue here, unfortunately. That said, honestly, now that I've determined that I can confidently extract rounds with aggressive pressure on the first try just about every time, I'm not going to be losing any sleep over it personally, because at the end of the day, for me, this is a range toy that's primarily just a fun and interesting gun to shoot. However, I will say, if this was my everyday carry or home defense gun, I would not be happy with where I'm at this point. Regardless, like I said, this gun is still a fun and interesting gun to run on the range, and I'm really excited to see how it does today. Hopefully things will run flawlessly and we can have a great day out on the range. So let's get out there and see how my Daniel Defense H9 performs. Okay, we did have a failure to go into battery here. I was able to just slap it forward. That's great. So I think it lost me there, but I think I overran the trigger, and I've got a dead trigger here. Double check. Yep, I've got a dead trigger, but I've got a round in the chamber. So, interesting. Guys, it looks like that was actually a squib load. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but I've still got a round in the chamber. I've got a bullet in the chamber. You probably can't see it, but I'm going to have to clear that. So that's interesting. Be careful out there, guys. So guys, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but that is a squib load. The round is stuck in the chamber. It did fire, but it did not exit the chamber. Now, this is honestly the second squib load that I've had in this gun, and that's really weird to me because I've never had squib loads before. This was with Blazer Brass 115, and then I had another with Gecko 124 that had been sitting on the range and rained on for a while, so I kind of attributed it to that, but a little bit concerning. Could be complete coincidence, but we're going to clear this squib load and keep running it and see what happens. That's 4. There to go into battery. I think that's the 7th one. I think that's 8, 9. Like 10. Another one, maybe 11 or something. See, it's doing it almost every time now. Alright guys, so some people have been reporting keyholing with their Daniel H9s. I'm going to do a little bit of a quick test here. I'm at about 10 yards. Shooting at that paper plate. See, I'm still not going into battery. I just relubed this, guys. You shouldn't have to relube it on the range when you're only shooting a couple of 100 rounds. That's like the 13th or 14th time that the slide has failed to go into battery. I'm really not happy about that. But let's see if it is keyholing. Hits look clean to me. Let's take a quick look. Yep, hopefully you guys can see that. Looks real good. No keyholing at all, so, you know, at least it's got that going for it. Another one. Gun. Another one. Another failed to go in the battery. Add to the list. Another one. Another one. Man, guys, I had a blast on the range today. It was my first time filming a handgun review video in 2024, and despite the mud, wind, and chilly weather, it was a great time, and it felt really awesome getting back out there. Unfortunately, I've got to say, I was extremely disappointed in the Daniel Defense H9 today. I shot 300 rounds of Blazer 115 today and had 0 failures under live fire, aside from my first ever squib load with Blazer ammunition, which I would really attribute to the ammo and not the gun. Definitely be careful out there, guys. That could have been way worse for me today if I hadn't caught it. But despite coming back from warranty repair with a brand new barrel that they knew would be scrutinized in an upcoming video review, I still had around 15 failures to go into battery from slide lock when inserting a fresh magazine. I'll have to review the footage and annotate the exact amount of times that happened here, but I was really not happy about it, honestly. Now, once the first round is chambered, the gun seems to run really well without any hitches, and it is a lot of fun to shoot, but man, guys, this shouldn't be a problem on a $400 gun, let alone a $1,300 gun. At this price bracket, there are so many amazing guns out there from countless manufacturers, including the brand new Shadow Systems MR920P, the CZ Shadow 2 Compact, the SIG P365 AXG series. There's really just an insane amount of competition at this price point, and in my opinion, this gun just really is not justifying its price tag in its current state at all. And to be perfectly clear here, I did everything that I could to help set the H9 up for success. Before the range trip today, I gave the gun a nice fresh coat of lubrication per the recommendations in the manual. Then when I started getting malfunctions on the range, I took the gun apart and added more lubrication again, which really didn't change anything. And prior to those 300 rounds that I shot today, I fired over 200 rounds while experiencing these issues during the initial break-in period when I first purchased it. Then I sent it in for warranty repair, and when it came back, I put another 100 rounds through it before firing the 300 that you saw today. So now at this point, I have over 600 rounds through this gun. It is well beyond the advertised break-in period, and the warranty repair clearly didn't fix the issues that I was having. It really just kind of blows my mind that in supposedly 1 million rounds of testing, they somehow never ran into this issue and pushed the release of these guns to the market. Now maybe the prototypes that they conducted their testing with worked great, and maybe it wasn't until they actually went into production that these issues started cropping up. But to have this many failures even after sending the gun in for warranty repair, that's honestly completely unacceptable in my opinion. And I'm pretty confident that most of you would agree, especially in today's market where there are so many great, reliable options for consumers. Now granted, Daniel Defense does have a lifetime warranty and they have a lot riding on their reputation with this gun, so I do think that they'll eventually figure out a way to get it fixed. But so far, man, this is not a good look for them at all, guys. I am really not impressed at this point. Now, as for the excessive force needed to manually eject a round, I did have to eject rounds a few times on the range today, and it was pretty consistent that if I used a pretty aggressive amount of force on the slide, I was able to get the rounds to eject on the first try. So while I do still feel that that's a very strange issue to have with this firearm, I'm in no way, shape, or form as concerned about that as I am about the out-of-battery issues that I've been having. Now, aside from the out-of-battery issues that I've been experiencing, I know that some people have been having issues with keyholing as well. Now, as you saw, I tested mine on the range today, and fortunately, I did not have any of those issues. However, the day after I filmed this video, Daniel Defense sent out an email to its H9 customers revealing that they had successfully recreated the keyholing issue with very specific ammunition under very specific conditions. So as of April 22nd, 2024, they announced that they have paused shipments and sales while they re-engineer and redesign their barrel. Now, I actually applaud the openness of communication with these issues, and I do believe that they want this gun to succeed and want their customers to be happy. But based on this communication, it sounds to me like they think that they've fixed the out of battery on the first round issue, and as we saw today, in my experience, they definitely have not. Alright, so with that rant out of the way, let's talk about how the Daniel Defense H9 performed under live fire today. It was pretty good, I would say. The recoil impulse to me definitely does not feel lighter than similarly appointed guns. In fact, it might even be a touch heavier due to the low bore axis and the position of the recoil assembly. But the recoil impulse itself is pretty unique feeling. It's very round and warm. It's certainly not sharp or snappy feeling really, so I would consider that a positive. It's definitely a pleasant, fun, and unique feeling gun to shoot, in my opinion. Now, in terms of muzzle rise, which is supposed to be the big claim to fame of the H9, I've got to be honest here, guys. In small doses and comparisons with other guns, I did think that the H9 was a little bit flatter shooting and faster back on target for me. But after going through a full range day with it, I would say I do still think it's a little flatter shooting, but honestly, it's really not something I would necessarily say is a game-changing level of difference. It is certainly far from the recoil deleting design that some people would claim it is. So for me, I do still get a decent amount of muzzle flip, which is really just physics at the end of the day. There's only so much you can do. And I do think that the muzzle flip I'm experiencing is comparatively less than other similarly appointed platforms, but not by a substantial amount necessarily. I will say it does return to zero pretty quickly for me, and like I said, it is pretty flat shooting and the dot tracked well for me today. But now that I'm about 600 rounds into this gun, I think the honeymoon phase is maybe wearing off a little bit, and I guess maybe I'm a little bit less impressed now than I was originally. Now realistically, it's also completely possible that the repeated failures to go into battery have frustrated me to the point of being less positive on the performance under live fire overall, so that's worth keeping in mind here. Honestly, I might just be a little bit salty here because I really do enjoy shooting this gun and I just wish that it worked 100% for me. Now my least favorite part of the experience today, aside from the previously discussed issues, was definitely the trigger. It's somewhere around 5 to 6 pounds, and in small doses it's really not too bad and I can get used to it pretty well, but when running it for a full day on the range, it really starts to lose its luster a little bit. Granted, keep in mind, I am looking at this from a fun at the range perspective, of course. For a self-defense focus, I would say that the trigger weight is probably appropriate. Now, aside from the weight, the trigger safety is just very odd and spongy feeling, and the reset is somewhat positive, but it's really not very forceful. So combining that reset with the relatively heavy pull, and I really felt like the trigger was holding me back a little bit from shooting as quickly as I would have liked, contributing to lower split times throughout the day than I'm typically used to, and effectively making me work harder for the splits that I was able to get. Then there's the frame or the grip, which in small doses during dry fire or shorter live fire sessions, I do generally like. I really like the 1911 grip angle, and I like the front strap serrations for the most part. They're actually way more aggressive than I initially expected, and over the course of the day, I did notice that they were really locking my primary hand in place, so that's good. Although I do suspect that some people out there will find them to be too aggressive and uncomfortable, but I personally do like them. But the big negative for me with the grip frame is just how thin it is. Because they're targeting more of a concealed carry type of market with the H9, it's a super thin grip frame, about the same thickness as a P365 actually. And with no aftermarket support available yet to replace the stock grips, we're left with a very thin gun that doesn't give me much room at all for my support hand to assist with recoil management. So between that and the trigger, the shooting experience was really not quite as strong as I wanted it to be. That said, I do have to say that the ratio of concealability to overall size and width compared with the recoil impulse and shootability is definitely in the H9's favor in my opinion. Realistically, for the size of this gun, I do still think that it punches pretty well above its weight in terms of the shooting experience and live fire performance, and it definitely has a unique feeling in hand that I've actually grown quite fond of personally. Now aside from all that, I also know that there are some people that have had issues with slide bite because of some of the sharp edges on the beaver tail that you can see here. But fortunately for me, I didn't have any discomfort at all in that area in my 300 rounds that I fired today. The magazine release worked great. It's in a perfect position for me. I really liked the relief cut and the grip panel, and it was really easy and positive to actuate. But the reloads with the H9 are really easy to fumble because there's barely any flaring in the magwell to speak of. It really doesn't leave a lot of room for error on the reload at all. If you're not dead on with your magazine placement, there's a good chance that you're going to get hung up on the frame while inserting a fresh magazine, which I found to be pretty disappointing and a little bit frustrating personally. A lot of guns in this price range have nicely flared built-in magwells or even external magwells that make reloads completely effortless. But in my experience, the Daniel H9 does not follow suit with its competitors in that regard. The C&H Precision optic plate worked well. The Holosun EPS red dot seemed to hold zero all day, and I'm actually loving that big window and nice clear 6 MOA dots, so that's good. I also ran a Surefire X300 weapon light with a Filster floodlight holster and had no issues with that setup either. It actually worked really well and was a lot of fun to run. So that pretty much covers it here, guys. The shooting experience is definitely interesting and unique compared to other platforms, but the differences are pretty subtle in my opinion. I have to say I really don't know if someone with minimal experience comparing various platforms would necessarily be able to pick out and appreciate all the differences and nuances all that easily either. I will say there definitely is a bit of cool factor for me to the unique look and feel of the gun and its overall design, but with all the failures to go into battery plus the keyholing that many other users have experienced, there's just simply no way I would trust my life to this gun in its current state. And honestly, I really wouldn't feel comfortable recommending this gun to anyone at this time either, even just for a fun range gun. Again, I do think that Daniel Defense will make this right eventually, and of course they're certainly not the first major company to have an embarrassing initial product release either. I think it'll be really interesting to see where the H9 stands a year from now for sure. In the meantime, another popular gun announced at SHOT Show this year is the Shadow Systems MR920P, and that's been getting some pretty glowing initial reviews. Now I recently picked one up, so I'll be filming a review of the MR920P soon, and I'm also thinking of doing a comparison video between the MR920P and the Daniel H9 in the near future here as well, so let me know down in the comments if that's something you would be interested in checking out. So that's going to be all for today, guys. I've got a lot more videos coming up soon, including more ARs, AKs, PCCs, handguns, and shotguns, so remember to like and subscribe, ring the bell, stay tuned, and thanks for stopping by.